Welcome to literary and jury charge practice. We'll start out with some literary practice. Ready? Here we go. Changes I've seen on Swedish roads have long fascinated me, where Swedes haven't implemented the 2+1 road system because of budget constraints or challenging terrain. They're frequently employed speed cameras, but not in the way you might expect. While driving to one of my favorite beaches south of Stockholm, I passed signs warning of speed cameras ahead. Why, I've always wondered, are authorities warning me? How do Swedes expect to generate revenue if they give drivers plenty of time to slow down? Turns out Swedes don't care all that much about making money from the cameras. Our goal is to get people to slow down and drive more safely, Bolin says, and we can get better compliance if we focus less on revenue. Sweden's response to mobile phones has also perplexed me. While other European countries have outlawed use of the device while driving, Sweden hasn't. Instead, Bolin says Swedes are working with car manufacturers to design a better phone interface, one that allows only voice activation while driving and locks up the keypad at certain speeds. Apple's CarPlay, a voice knob and touchscreen controlled iPhone system built into select cars, is an example. Swedes have used engineering to try to prevent drunk driving too. In Sweden, school bus drivers cannot start some buses unless they blow into a dashboard-mounted breathalyzer, Bolin says. If every car were fitted with an alkalock, we would be close to reducing drunk driving deaths to zero. In the U.S., the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is testing two related devices. Despite the reduction in traffic deaths in Sweden, Vision Zero has its share of critics. Many who'd pushed for stronger driver education and human behavior fixes have been reluctant to support an emphasis on road design. Others have questioned the price tag. Early cost-benefit analyses estimate that Sweden has spent about $100 million per saved life. The 2+1 road has cost about $3 million per saved life, a figure that drops with each passing year. Some people also have taken issue with the name, arguing that Vision Zero is not really aimed at zero deaths, but simply at decreasing fatalities. The zero, they argue, is just catchy marketing. That may be, but perhaps reducing traffic deaths needs a little catchy marketing. Nevertheless, Vision Zero is spreading, and Bolin sees bigger gains on the horizon. With driverless and semi-autonomous cars already entering traffic, the burden of safety will shift even more to car makers. We're in the communication with car manufacturers every day to help make sure the cars can better interpret and handle the road systems, Bolin says, and this technology will allow many cities and countries to leapfrog much of the human-based regulations as they achieve higher levels of safety. The way he sees it, we're rolling in the right direction. Right, now we'll try some jury charge practice. Ready? Here we go. The second element that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that the defendant kidnapped Jennifer Hawk-Pettit within the meaning of our kidnapping and accomplice statutes. Under our law, a person commits kidnapping when he abducts another person. I have already charged you both on the meaning of the term abducts and on the specific required for kidnapping in my charge on the 6th count. The specific intent required for abduction is the specific intent to prevent the liberation of the person in question. The state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant had that specific intent. With respect to the 10th count, the state need not prove that the defendant restrained the person abducted with intent to accomplish or advance the commission of felony, larceny, or any other crime. The defendant must have also had the specific intent to aid the principal, namely Stephen Hayes, in his commission of the crime of kidnapping. In addition, acting with those intentions. The defendant must have aided Stephen Hayes in Mr. Hayes's commission of the kidnapping. The third element that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that the murder occurred during the course of the kidnapping. The phrase "in the course of the kidnapping" is a time limitation and means conduct occurring immediately before the commission, during the commission, or on the immediate flight after the commission of the kidnapping. The immediate murder of a person to eliminate a witness to the crime or to avoid detection is also in the course of the kidnapping. The two-witness rule, which I have discussed in my instruction on the fourth count, applies to the 10th count as well. I need not repeat that instruction. If you unanimously find that the state has called two witnesses or the equivalent thereto and has proven each of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find that the defendant guilty as charged. If you unanimously find that the state has not called two witnesses or the equivalent thereto, or has failed to prove one or more elements beyond a reasonable doubt, you must go on to consider the lesser included offense of felony murder. The 10th count specifically charges the defendant with the crime of capital felony. However, the very nature of this offense under our penal code is such that it may include the elements of the crime of felony murder. This brings into play the rule of law known as lesser included offense. Under this rule of law, if and only if you unanimously find that the proof is not sufficient to justify conviction of the crime specifically charged, capital felony, you must then go on to consider whether it is sufficient to establish beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant's guilt of the lesser included crime of felony murder, as I shall define that crime for you in a moment. Before you consider any lesser included crime, however, you must find unanimously that the defendant is not guilty of the crime with which he is specifically charged in the information. Therefore, if you do not find the defendant guilty of the specific crime charged in the 10th count, capital felony, you need go no further in your deliberations, and your verdict will be guilty as charged. If, however, you find him not guilty of the specific crime charged, you must then go on to consider whether or not he is guilty of the lesser included offense of felony murder. In that event, if you do find him guilty of the lesser included offense, felony murder, your verdict will be guilty of felony murder. In summary, then, you will have one of three possible verdicts on the 10th count: 1, guilty as charged; 2, guilty of felony murder; and 3, not guilty. I will now instruct you on the elements of the lesser included crime of felony murder. Section 53A to 54C of the Connecticut General Statutes provides that a person is guilty of murder when, acting either alone or with one or more persons, he commits kidnapping or sexual assault in the first degree, and in the course of and in furtherance of such crime or flight therefrom, he or another participant, if any, causes the death of a person other than one of the participants. The portion of Section 53A to 54C concerning sexual assault in the first degree does not apply to the 10th, 11th, or 12th counts. That portion applies only to the 14th count, on which I shall instruct you later. For purposes of the 10th, 11th, and 12th counts, the portion of the statute dealing with kidnapping is the only portion which applies. For you to convict the defendant of this crime, the state must prove each of the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt: 1, that the defendant, acting alone or with one or more persons, committed or attempted to commit the crime of kidnapping; 2, that the defendant or another participant in the crime of kidnapping caused the death of Jennifer Hawk Pettit; 3, that the defendant or another participant caused the death of Jennifer Hawk Pettit while in the course of and in furtherance of the commission or attempted commission of the crime of kidnapping or in immediate flight from the crime; and 4, that Jennifer Hawk Pettit was not a participant in the kidnapping. The first element of felony murder that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that the defendant, acting alone or with one or more persons, committed or attempted to commit the crime of kidnapping. As I explained to you a moment ago, under our law, a person commits kidnapping when he abducts another person. I have already charged you both on the meaning of the term abducts and on the specific intent required for kidnapping in my charge on the 6th count, and I need not repeat that instruction. The second element of felony murder that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that the actions of the defendant or another participant in the crime of kidnapping caused the death of Jennifer Hawk Pettit. You must find that Jennifer Hawk Pettit died as a result of the defendant's or another participant's actions. Remember, with respect to the 10th count, the state specifically claims that another participant, Stephen Hayes, was the principal actor causing the death of Jennifer Hawk Pettit. The third element of felony murder that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that the defendant or another participant caused the death of Jennifer Hawk Pettit while in the course of and in furtherance of the commission of the crime of kidnapping or in immediate flight from the crime. This means that the death occurred during the commission of the crime of kidnapping and in the course of carrying out its objective. Right, now let's try some literary practice. Ready? Here we go. On a cool afternoon in the heart of Hollywood, as tourists gawked at Batman and Superman impersonators in front of the Dolby Theater while a guy in a bucket hat did the moonwalk, Tim Furneaux looked out at pedestrians crossing the busy street and smiled. Not long ago, the intersection of Hollywood Boulevard and Highland Avenue had a reputation for being crowded, chaotic, and collision-prone, but as part of the Los Angeles Vision Zero efforts, Furneaux and other LA Department of Transportation engineers reconfigured its traffic signals rather than allowing cars and pedestrians to cross in the same direction at the same time as they had for years. The engineers installed a scramble crosswalk that permits pedestrians to cross only when all cars stop and then prohibits the pedestrians from crossing when automobiles roll. Initial results have been promising. Before the change, the intersection averaged 1.5 pedestrian-involved collisions a year, with other crashes occurring too. After the change took effect in November 2015, the number of collisions dropped. In 2016, only 2 minor crashes occurred and neither involved pedestrians. While few LA intersections might qualify for scrambles like this one, highly pedestrian volume and a history of crashes typically are needed. Furneaux believes the drop in collisions shows Vision Zero's potential in LA. Los Angeles is relatively new to the movement. City officials approved the initiative in 2015 and soon after set about analyzing local accident data. Their findings were striking. While pedestrians and cyclists were involved in only 14% of collisions, they accounted for 43% of all traffic deaths in 2014. What's more, almost 2/3 of all fatal accidents occurred on only 6% of city streets. In January, the city announced a plan to cut traffic deaths by 20% by year's end and to eliminate traffic fatalities altogether by 2025. Under the plan, engineers prioritize safety over traffic flow and emphasize changes that will protect those most at risk: children, older adults, cyclists, and pedestrians. Officials are targeting corridors and intersections where serious and fatal accidents involving pedestrians and cyclists occur most often. Among the strategies the city plans to employ, extend curbs at some intersections or improve visibility and reduce distances that pedestrians must cross, add leading pedestrian intervals at key crosswalks to give pedestrians a few seconds to begin crossing and catch drivers' attention before cars get the green light, and enforce existing traffic laws. A $2 million education campaign is also in the works, and the Auto Club is supporting this effort with safety resources and other informative materials. Vision Zero represents a major shift in thinking about traffic safety for a city that's synonymous with car culture. LA did, after all, serve as the backdrop for the movies Speed and The Fast and the Furious. That's no small thing, but Furneaux believes the time has come. The culture, he says, is ripe for change. Excuse me. Okay, let's get back to some jury charge. Okay, ready? Here we go. In the course of the commission of the crime of kidnapping means during any part of the defendant's participation in the crime of kidnapping. The phrase in the course of the commission is a time limitation and means conduct occurring immediately before the commission, during the commission, or in the immediate flight after the commission of the crime of kidnapping. The immediate murder of a person to eliminate a witness to the crime or to avoid detection is also in the course of the commission. Thus, the death of Jennifer Hawk Pettit must have occurred somewhere within the time span of the occurrence of the facts which constitute the kidnapping. In furtherance of the crime of kidnapping means that the killing must in some way be causally connected to or as a result of the crime of kidnapping or the flight from the crime of kidnapping. The actions of the defendant that caused the death of Jennifer Hawk Pettit must be done to aid the crime of kidnapping in some way or to further the purpose of the crime of kidnapping. It does not matter if the act that caused the death was committed unintentionally or accidentally, rather than with the intention to cause death. The defendant is as guilty when committing this form of murder as he would be if he had intentionally committed the act that caused the death. The fourth element of felony murder that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that Jennifer Hawk Pettit was not a participant in the crime of kidnapping. A participant is one who takes part in or shares in the underlying crime. If you find that the state has proven each of the elements of the crime of felony murder beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find the defendant guilty of felony murder. If you find the state has failed to prove one or more elements beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find him not guilty. The 11th count accuses Joshua Commissar of capital felony and charges that at the town of Cheshire on or about the 23rd day of July 2007 between 3 a.m. and 10 a.m. at 300 Sorghum Mill Drive, the said Joshua Commissar, with the intent to cause the death of a person who he kidnapped, to wit, Haley Pettit, did cause her death during the course of the kidnapping in violation of Section 53A to 54B5 of the Connecticut General Statutes. I have already charged you on the elements of the crime of capital felony by murder during the course of a kidnapping in my instruction on the 10th count, and I need not repeat that discussion. You must, of course, keep in mind that the alleged victim in the 11th count is Haley Pettit. With respect to the 11th count, proof of the element of murder will depend on your verdict as to the second count. The state must additionally prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant had kidnapped Haley Pettit within the meaning of our kidnapping and, if appropriate, accomplice statutes, and that the murder of Haley Pettit occurred during the course of the kidnapping. Although the 11th count charges the defendant as a principal actor under the capital murder statute, you may, as an alternative, find the defendant guilty under a theory of accessorial liability pursuant to Section 53A to 8 of the Connecticut General Statutes. I have already instructed you on the law of accessorial liability in my charge on the first count, and I need not repeat that discussion. For you to find the defendant guilty of the 11th count, the state must prove each of the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. 1. That the defendant was convicted of the murder of Haley Pettit. 2. That the defendant kidnapped Haley Pettit within the meanings of our kidnapping and, if appropriate, accomplice statutes. And 3. That the murder occurred during the course of the kidnapping. Finally, the two-witness rule, which I have discussed in my instruction on the 4th count, applies to the 11th count. The rule of lesser included offenses, which I explained in my charge on the 10th count, applies to the 11th count as well, if and only if you unanimously acquit the defendant of capital felony as alleged in the 11th count. You must consider the lesser included offense of felony murder. I have already instructed you on the elements of felony murder in my charge on the 10th count, and I need not repeat that instruction. You must, of course, keep in mind that the alleged victim in the 11th count is Haley Pettit. The 12th count accuses John Commissar of capital felony and charges that at the town of Cheshire on or about the 23rd day of July 2007 between 3 and 10 a.m. at 300 Sorghum Mill Drive, the said Joshua Commissar, with the intent to cause the death of a person who he kidnapped, to wit, Michaela Pettit, did cause her death during the course of the kidnapping in violation of Section 53A to 54B5 of the Connecticut General Statutes. I have already charged you on the crime of capital felony by murder during the course of a kidnapping in my instruction on the 10th count, and I need not repeat that discussion. You must, of course, keep in mind that the alleged victim in the 12th count is Michaela Pettit. With respect to the 12th count, proof of the element of murder will depend on your verdict. As to the 3rd count, the state must additionally prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant had kidnapped Michaela Pettit within the meanings of our kidnapping and accomplice statutes, and that the murder of Michaela Pettit occurred during the course of the kidnapping. All right, that will conclude our literary and jury charge practice.